I was very saddened to hear that the fascist regime in Iran executed my father along with another political prisoner by the name of Muhammad Ali Haj Aghai, whom both had visited Camp Ashraf.
For those unfamiliar with the religious fascism ruling Iran, it is very hard to imagine a regime exists in the 21st century that actually punishes, imprisons, and even executes people for the mere reason of visiting their family members. However, the mullah's regime is such a regime. This regime has prosecuted and punished PMOI family members inside Iran at times just for making a phone call with relatives in Ashraf or providing financial assistance for their loved ones. Currently, at least 188 Ashraf residents have relatives in Iran arrested for making contact with their loved ones in Ashraf. A number of these apprehended individuals are old and ill mothers and fathers that are currently held in Iran's prisons and torture dungeons. They haven't committed any crime other than visiting Ashraf and their loved ones, making a phone call or sending an email to them, which are all considered a crime by the mullah's regime. What is surprising is that even in the indictment issued in their kangaroo trials, it is stated that they are being convicted for visiting the home of the Munafiqin grouplet in Ashraf. The Iran regime publicly announced anyone visiting Ashraf is considered a muharib, meaning a person that has waged war against God, and they will be treated accordingly. As far as the despotic regime's judiciary is concerned, muharib is punished by death. From 2003 and since the security of Ashraf residents as protected persons under the 4th Geneva Convention was provided by U.S. forces, the residents were able to enjoy family visits. Therefore, among the vast numbers of Iranian pilgrims pouring into Iraq to visit the country's religious sites, far from the mullah's eyes, families of Ashraf residents would come to Ashraf to see their loved ones. A large number of those visiting Ashraf would come from the U.S. and European countries. In Ashraf, there was a separate facility with adequate necessities for these family visits named the Iran Hotel, allocated for the families to be able to be with their loved ones in peace for as many days and weeks they wished. The Iranian regime, informed of these visits, began a widespread campaign of arrests and crackdown on Ashraf residents' families. In December 2008, 18 relatives of Ashraf residents who had travel visas to Iraq were arrested in Tehran's airport and sent directly to the notorious Evin prison. Among them were women and mothers aging over 70.
تقریبا 2 سال پیش مادر بزرگم دوباره داشت با ویزای رسمی از فرودگاه تهران می اومد عراق که بیاد منو ببینه. اون روز هم دستگیرش کردیم و دوباره بردینش زندان اوین. مادر بزرگ 75 ساله من.
برادر خودم رو در آذر ماه گذشته، آذر ماه 88 دستگیر کرد. خواهرم رو در قبلترش در دیماه سال قبلترش دستگیر کرد. خواهرم به همراه مادرم در فرودگاه تهران با مدارک قانونی که قصد داشت بیاد اینجا و دیدن ما در فرودگاه ریختن و دستگیر کردن با تعداد دیگری از خانواده ها.
میثاق برادر منه، 3 سال که الان زندانه و فقط به خاطر سفری که به اشرف داشت 14 سال حکم زندان گوهردشت گرفت.
روز 2 بهمن 1387 مزدورای وزارت اطلاعات به خونه ما توی تهران حمله کردن و مادرم فاطمه ضیایی آزاد رو به جرم اینکه 2 دخترش در شهر اشرف هستن دستگیر کردن و به زندان اوین بردن.
رژیم پدید آخوندی پدرم شیر محمد رضایی رو به همراه تعدادی از خانواده دیگر که فرزندانشون در اشرف فقط به جرم اینکه به دیدار فرزندانشون در اشرف اومدن اونا رو دستگیر کرد، با ضرب و شتم به زندان اوین برده.
بعد از اینکه من به اشرف رسیدم، بعد چند مدت تماس گرفتم که بگم به خانواده‌ام سرحال ساران رسیدم به اشرف و این تماس تلفنی، همین یک تماس تلفنی بلای جون خانواده‌ام شد. رژیم آخوندی خواهرم شبنم مددزاده دانشجوی دانشگاه کرج رو دستگیر کرد و بعد از دستگیری خواهرم برادرم که علت دستگیری اون جویا شده بود اونم دستگیر کرد.
The transfer of Ashraf's protection to the Iraqi government brought a complete end to all visits, including family visits. From 2003 to 2009, when Ashraf's security was provided by U.S. forces, Ashraf's gates were open to all, including their own families from inside Iran and abroad, from Europe, the United States, Canada, and even Australia. They would at times stay in Ashraf for weeks. Also, lawyers, jurists, politicians, members of parliaments, human rights activists, journalists, tribal sheikhs, and Iraqi citizens from all walks of life, sometimes in groups, would come and stay in Ashraf for days and take part in various ceremonies and events. They would also have meetings with U.S. military officers or Iraqi tribal sheikhs and dignitaries. IRNA, the mullah's state-run news agency, wired a report on October 2, 2005, citing the Nejat Society affiliated to the Ministry of Intelligence in Isfahan province. During the past 2 years, 1,600 families in 9 groups have been sent to Iraq by this association to meet their loved ones in Camp Ashraf. However, following the transfer of security from U.S. forces to the Iraqi government in 2009, Ashraf all of a sudden came under a full siege and its gates were closed to all. The Iraqi government, at the behest of the Iranian regime, banned all family visits and ordered all its embassies in various countries across the globe to not issue visas for anyone seeking to visit Ashraf, even those who had received visas back when the Americans were in charge of Ashraf's security. After the transfer of security to the Iraqis, no visits were allowed. A number of the residents' family members, despite waiting behind Ashraf's gates for days in the winter cold just to see their loved ones, were not able to do so.
ولی متاسفانه اصلا نذاشتن ما بریم الان 2 روز اینجا معطل شدیم ولی نمیدونیم چه سرنوشتی داریم.
نذاشتن که بریم تو.
Through its intelligence agents in Iraq's embassy in Tehran or other countries, the mullah's regime would only provide visas for those whose names were given by the Ministry of Intelligence.
به سفارت عراق درخواست دادیم. بعد از اینکه درخواستمون رو کتباً دادیم و باشون تلفنی صحبت کردم، گفتن به چه دلیلی میخوای بری؟ و وقتی که قید کردم که میخوام برم اشرف و دخترم رو ببینم، گفتن باید وزارت کشور و نخست وزیری بهش اصلا خیلی قید کردن که حتما شخص نخست وزیر باید درخواست شما رو قبول کنه و در اون صورت بهتون ویزا خواهند داد. به هر حال پیگیری‌های دوباره ما نتیجه نداد و همون جواب به ما دادن.
پدر من الان مدت بیشتر از 22 ساله که مقیم کشور کاناداست و تا اونجایی که من فهمیدم چند بار به سفارت عراق در کانادا مراجعه کرده که بتونه یک ویزای مسافرتی بگیره که بیاد اینجا برای دیدن من و خواهرم که اونم اینجا در اشرفه. ولی علیرغم چند بار مراجعه مقامات عراقی بهش جواب رد دادن و این ویزای مسافرتی رو بهش ندادن.
در چند سال پیش ما میتونستیم راحت به اشرف بریم و عزیزانمون رو، بستگانمون رو، دوستانمون رو در اونجا ببینیم از نزدیک. ولی الان حدود تقریبا 2 سالی است که به هیچ عنوان اجازه رفتن به اونجا نمیدن.
الان 1 سال و نیمه چند بار به سفارت عراق در آلمان مراجعه کردم، من خانمم بچه‌هام همه چند بار مراجعه کردیم. در جواب ما میگه که اگر که میخواید ویزا بگیرید باید برید از ایران یا از دبی بگیرید.
ولی ما که این همه مراجعه کردیم هنوز یک جواب صحیح به ما ندادن.
من آخرین بار حدود 4 ماه پیش مراجعه کردم به سفارت عراق و گفتم که میخوام فرزندم و بستگانم اونجاست ببینم. به من جواب رد دادن و گفتن باید برید سفارت ایران.
من مادرم تو اشرفه، خیلی دوست دارم برم ببینمش اما من ویزا نمیدن. خیلی از دوستان رفتن که ویزا بگیرن اما هیچ کدومشون ندادن، در حال این که رژیم یه سری مزدور به اسم فامیل بردن در اشرف دارن بچه‌ها رو اذیت میکنن، داد میزنن و فحش میدن.
من در سال گذشته 3 بار تقاضای ویزا از سفارت عراق کردم برای دیدار فامیلی هم در اشرف. این 3 بار هر بار جواب رد گرفتم بدون هیچ گونه دلیل قانع کننده‌ای.
ماها به عنوان خانواده اشرفیان هیچ وقت این امکان رو پیدا نکردیم. با مراجعه مکرر به سفارت عراق این امکان رو به ما نمیدن که ما بتونیم ویزا بگیریم و به دیدن عزیزامون در شهر اشرف بریم.
In dispatching its elements to Ashraf, the mullah's regime at first began with those who had relatives inside Ashraf, people like Muhammad Akbarzadeh, Funnudi, Hajari, and Mustafa Muhammadi. However, a number of agents sent to Ashraf actually had no relatives there, such as Hadi Sha'bani, Ali Muradi, Karim Sheikh, and Makki Rafi'i coming from inside Iran, or intelligence agents such as Masoud Khudabandeh and his wife Anne Singleton, Sobhani, Qashqavi, and Rastgu coming from abroad.
But I can tell you about one person that we did hear from again. And that was Batul Satani. If you haven't heard that name, she was a resident of Ashraf who left and went back to Iran. Within a month or two after she left, I got a frantic call in the middle of the night from one of our police stations outside of Ashraf, saying that Miss Sultani was back in Iraq with an Iranian passport. And she told me a story through my interpreter that she had been brought back to Iran and was being forced to come back to Iraq for protection of her family. She said that she escaped from her captors in Baghdad, and then she wanted to come back to Camp Ashraf. Well, shortly thereafter, she did show up back up at Ashraf in protest, saying that her husband was being held captive by the people of Ashraf. I personally interviewed her husband, as I have interviewed thousands of other people in Camp Ashraf, along with family members. She was there at the behest of the Quds Force as an agent of the Iranian government. I can tell you that the people of Ashraf are there because they want to be there.
In an attempt to pretend these individuals are relatives of Ashraf residents who had come for family visits, Iran's Ministry of Intelligence carries out its related activities under the guise of one of its branches by the name of the Nejat Society, having offices all over Iran. For relatives of Ashraf residents, this name is a synonym for repression and arrest, while the real families of Ashraf residents are jailed just for making a phone call or prosecuted and executed for visiting Ashraf. However, from the regime's perspective, Ashraf residents' family members are those who place themselves at the disposal of the regime to carry out the mullah's repressive orders. These individuals are those who the mullahs name and consider as Ashraf residents' families. Under orders from Iran's Ministry of Intelligence, they gathered and staged a demonstration outside the UK embassy in Tehran, chanting the PMOI should not have been delisted. The Iranian regime transferred a group of individuals under the guise of Ashraf residents' family members to the camp's main gate to stage gatherings, support, and expressed their gratitude to the Iraqi government and armed forces, demanding their family members living in Ashraf be massacred. A number of these individuals have no family relations with any of the residents in Ashraf at all. These so-called families of Ashraf residents that stationed outside Ashraf for months after the July 2009 and April 2011 attacks against Ashraf wrote a letter to Maliki expressing their gratitude and support of the Iraqi army's attacks against the residents.
تحویل دولت ایران نماید پیشاپیش از همکاری صمیمانه آن دولت محترم به خواسته های ما همچنین آزادی زمین های کشور عراق کمال تشکر را داریم.
What is interesting is that intelligence agents disguised as Ashraf residents' family members sent to Ashraf remain there despite the fact that nearly all of the residents have transferred to Liberty. Therefore, while Ashraf residents' true families who sought to see their loved ones are deprived of any such visits, agents of the Ministry of Intelligence are present full-time outside the camp, enjoying the support and company of Iraqi army and police. Cameras and loudspeakers belonging to the Ministry of Intelligence were installed around Ashraf by these very agents with the help of ministry technicians, used to impose psychological torture on the residents on a 24-hour basis, threatening the residents to carnage and massacre.
آگاه باشید که خانواده ها هر لحظه اراده کنن اشرف رو با خاک خون یکی میکنن.
The mullah's regime showed these same individuals in its TV reports and conducted interviews with them, as if they are people whose relatives are held against their will in Ashraf, and the PMOI is not allowing them to see their loved ones.
I've had family members come to the gates and say, my child is being held against her will, Mustafa. And he stayed at that gate day after day. And every time I would go in and I would talk to her, you sure you want to stay here? And she would say yes.
این مزدوری که در حقیقت دشمن منه نه پدر من از کانادا بلند شده اومده عراق و شده سرنگردون این مزدوران وزارت اطلاعات. این که ظاهرا یک پناهنده بیشتر نیست و من خودم از وضعیتش کاملا با خبر هستم و پول آنچنانی هم که نداره که بخواد هزینه خودش رو از کانادا به عراق بده و اقامت طولانی مدتش رو توی هتل‌های عراق رو بپردازه. اینا رو از کجا میاره؟
Anyways, families and family emotions are only tools at the disposal of the inhumane fascism ruling Iran. As far as the regime is concerned, families of Ashraf residents are only defined in two ways. Either they stand alongside their loved ones and refuse to condemn them, whose fates are prison and execution, or they surrender themselves to the regime and condemn their loved ones and pressure them to return, surrender, and succumb before the Iranian regime.